Hello, welcome everyone to today's podcast brought to you by TechEdge AI. I'm Bhakti, your host, and we have a special guest with us today, Sam Fok, the CEO of Femtosense. Sam, thank you for joining us.
Nice to be here, Bhakti. It's great to meet everybody, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sam. So, Sam, you've had an impressive background. I mean, having graduated from Stanford University. So can you tell us about a journey from being a student at Stanford to becoming a CEO of Femtosense?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess wouldn't say that was sort of pre-planned when I first started as a student. So we're talking about grad school here. I did my PhD at Stanford in electrical engineering, and certainly didn't start the PhD thinking that, we're going to create a startup company out of this, although that does tend to happen coming out of Stanford. But the idea of the company really came from the work that myself and my co-founders, who are also in the lab, this is the Brains and Silicon Lab at Stanford, work that we were doing. We didn't really see anything in the world like it. And, this was 2018. So as you may remember, AI was starting to get pretty interesting then. I mean, it's even more interesting now, but it really was starting to get some traction. And I think the other important part was that silicon started to really seem investable, right? So if you guys remember the, 2020 teens or earlier 20 teens, the whole idea was that it's just like, if you're not doing software, like, don't start a company. But, by 2018, right, there have been some interesting plays in there. So combine these two things together, or three things. AI is interesting. Silicon started to become investable. You don't see anything like what you're doing on your work in the world. So, it's kind of why not?
Correct.
And or you could think of it as it's up to you to bring it to the world to help people benefit from it. Otherwise, it's going to end up on a library shelf somewhere, and that's great and all, but it's much nicer if the things that you work on can potentially make an impact in the world.
That's absolutely interesting. So trying to understand the practical limitations in deployment, how do the practical limitations of power consumption and cost rather than capabilities influence the deployment of generative AI and large language models?
That is the question of the day. You may think reaching the economic limits of where it's just going on this single line of, LLMs, transformer-based models, just scaling up a big compute data centers. What can the, economics or the investors or the public really bear here? So there's some real challenges in the world. There's starting to be some questions to be like, how, for all the money that has gone into generative AI to LLMs, how are you going to justify that, given the revenues there and sort of the capabilities? And so this is something that we're very much working towards. We have a little bit different of course, angle on it. The idea is that, maybe a lot of these capabilities you don't want to put in a huge data center and a huge server, right? Maybe you want to put them in your devices in the real world, right? Because from what we're seeing in our customers, they of course are interested in bringing AI capabilities to their devices. You're talking about, an air conditioner that you could just tell, cool down or turn off. These things could be pretty convenient, help your life be more convenient. But the question is, does that justify making an API call to a server in the back end, paying some amount of money for that, and our customer is really willing to pay that? So our take is that, if you put it out into the product outside of the data center, you don't have to invest the trillions and billions of dollars to, build out that infrastructure. And it's much more scalable in terms of how AI is really going to be introduced into the world. Because, there's only so much, let's say, investor patience, balance sheet spend that people want to put in here before they start seeing returns. And so it's a very big question now, literally, in terms of dollars. Right? People are saying there's like a big $600 billion gap between how much money people invested and how much people are earning in, meaningful revenue. And that's really serious. So I think we're starting to get some questions into the space about how you can really scale this economically, not just sort of technically.
So it's like having a very fine balance between the economics and what are the technical aspects to it. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting time in this transition point where people are starting to ask these questions.
So speaking of navigating challenges, let's talk about partnerships. I mean, why is it crucial for semiconductor startups to establish strong partnerships in order to, successfully bring their products to market?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that you have to do as a startup. Any startup, you of course have to find your product market fit, get your product right, get your market right, get your operations. And so here is one thing. So partnerships in particular, the ones that we have, say with, IMEC, we also have one with the Semiconductor. These can really help in these areas, right? So for us specifically, we're coming from sort of design side, right? We were doing that in our research and algorithms, software, hardware, silicon design, all that, right? What we're not coming from is sort of, the operation side. It's like, okay, well, who's going to help us bring up, these wafer volumes? Who's going to get this into the mass production, the full mass set, the test chips? All these things are very helpful to have partners on who have existing relationships, right? Because, it's not like you just go to the corner store and say, hey, I would like to, send out a wafer design. They're like, no, there's only a few places where that actually happens. There is a lot of existing sort of traffic there. And so having somebody who's your partner, who's kind of on the inside there, can really help smooth that over. So that was sort of our IMEC partnership. And then, with the above, they're already a big player in the appliances space. So it's like, okay, well, partnered together, playing off each other's strengths. We're bringing the AI capabilities, combining that with their very strong manufacturing and design side of MCUs, microcontrollers. This is a great partnership to bring these new products and capabilities ultimately to the end consumer here.
I'm sure it's a key criteria that can either break the startup or, make the startup. So startup journey actually helps if you have great partnerships.
Absolutely. You have 24 hours in a day. Hopefully you're not spending all that doing your startup, but so you have to decide where to focus that energy in that time, right? So anytime you can kind of, short circuit things that you have to do that are not differentiated, let's say, compared to what everybody else have to do, is a very strong case to do that kind of work through a partner versus trying to do it yourself.
Absolutely. So let's delve into some of the technical aspects of the technology. So what are the key benefits and challenges of using sparsity to integrate AI into everyday electronic devices?
Yeah, so this gets back to, your first question about what are the challenges? The challenges, people want to put AI in their products. Great, cool demos and cool new capabilities. However, it does cost money. It costs, either just the cost to the consumer, it also costs electricity. And the question is, what are people willing to sort of pay for the state of these capabilities? And here's where sparsity can help. Because sparsity just means zeros in your algorithm. So when you're doing math, if you have zeros and it's a linear operator, you don't have to do it in the hardware level. And so this is the idea is that, a lot of the work that these AI algorithms do can be zeroed out. These can be sparsified when you sort of are, have done your training. So this means that your algorithm is ultimately smaller. And so let's say instead of 100 megabytes of memory that you need, maybe you only need 10. Or instead of 10, you only need 1, right? That's a real cost saving there and energy saving. And so if you can bring the same capabilities in this smaller footprint, ultimately to end consumers cheaper, which means it's much more viable as a product, sort of makes sense to introduce it there. So that's sort of the benefit side of sparsity. Now, of course, everything has trade-offs. It does take a little bit of work to optimize algorithms in this way. I would say it's not too different than when you're, doing this quantization work that people often have to do. So instead of using, 32-bit floating point numbers, people are trying it with like 8-bit integers, some even going down extreme to like, 1-bit or 2-bit integer math, right? So this is sort of a similar kind of optimization. You could say it opens up another degree of freedom here. Instead of using all 1 billion parameters in my model, maybe I want a billion possible things I can do when I'm learning. But once I learn how to do a task, I don't need all billion, workers here. I just need maybe some subset of them. And so this is the idea of sparsity. It's really identifying which parts of your neural network are actually, doing the task versus which parts, once you learn how to do the task, you don't really need anymore. And so you'll, of course, only deploy resources for the things that you need. But it does take a little bit of optimization work, just like quantization does. And so, yeah, those are sort of the pros and cons that you're playing with here with this fundamental sparsity technology.
I'm sure it demands a lot of being very careful, and you have to be very cautious about the implementations as well.
Like all technologies, yes. These are complicated systems. A lot of you go silicon all the way up to algorithm. Things do have to line up there, which, yeah, absolutely.
So looking ahead, the semiconductor industry is always evolving. So how is AI making a difference in everyday lifestyle, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, so, in terms of the industry, it is definitely sort of the North Star that everybody is kind of driving towards right now. Everybody and their distant relative is all, working in some way, shape, or form towards and introducing it into their products or their life. In terms of day-to-day, I think this is a very interesting time because, there's a lot of exploration of possible applications, right? So I just listed one earlier. It's like talk to your air conditioner, talk to your remote control, have have your computer sort of help you generate your presentations, or maybe your content. Maybe we're we're generated here, but no, I don't. We're not yet. So there's a lot of things that you could potentially do, and this is really the time early in the technology when people are exploring. Right, it's not while everybody is sort of heading towards AI in general. They're sort of all fanning out to many different kinds of applications. It's like AI for presentations, AI for voice control, AI for enhancing images, right? There's a lot of things that are sort of kind of open to try. So, this is a good time to be a developer in here, and it's sort of open. So, I see a lot of people kind of getting into the AI field with this sort of gold rush, like, let's try many things. Ultimately, of course, a lot of these things don't make sense or won't make sense. But this is the time to be in the field because all this opportunity is available.
I mean, what makes sense, and there's sometimes something that doesn't make sense. I mean, what is the silliest thing you've demanded so many?
The silliest thing? So I think I haven't done this myself, but I think some of the silliest things I've seen are with, say, very particular areas like law, and this is interesting, right? It's like, there's a lot of people thinking about introducing AI there. But of course, there were the things in the news like, fake cases being cited and such, right? But it does, I think, have some interesting implications on sort of the volume of work that is being generated. And so, for better or worse, that's one thing that I think is a little bit silly, but is happening, right? And so, we will see where it goes. This is aside from like, prompting to say like, I want to turn my office into a cat cafe, right? And please help me imagine that. That's a little bit more on the fun side, but there's so many things you could do. It's pretty fun.
So getting back to the last question of today's podcast, what emerging trends and technologies are likely to shape the future of semiconductor industry over the next decade?
It's kind of the ones that have always been there, sort of, underlying it all, right? It's really the economics of it all, right? So it's not so much, I mean, there are definitely the technical currents ride on top of, I think, the underlying economics of, how much it costs to do these things. So, we are in the era where, it's not just the nice one story to rule them all. It's just, ride transistors down in size. And so I think this is similarly a time where there's a lot of exploration going on at both lower and higher levels, right? So you're looking at, materials, but you're also looking at a lot of, computer architecture, basically trying to find ways to use these devices a little bit differently, put them in different sort of systems. That's where kind of we take up, right? So of course I'm going to think this is interesting, but instead of taking your standard, processor, sort of CPU or GPU, trying to think of kind of different ways of architecting the system, different accelerations that you can add in order to, reap gains that, and 10 years ago, you would have just said, just wait, because the foundries will do their job. They will, shrink the process technology. You'll get your, 1.5, 2x, 4x win, depending on we were in that trend. But now it's like, you can still do that, but it will cost you. And so this is what I'm saying. The economics is sort of pushing back against that trend. And it means that other things kind of open up in terms of opportunity. And those things, from my perspective, are things like the computer architecture, the software and the algorithms, kind of thinking about what you can do along those three areas that you can't do already. And this is where the opportunity is, at least from our perspective.
Insightful. I mean, I'm sure it's an exciting time for the industry with so much innovation on the horizon. So, Sam, So Sam, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. It's been a fascinating discussion. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Stay tuned for more episodes where we bring you the latest trends and technology and innovation. This is Bhakti signing off. Thank you so much.